Chris, I'd like to ask you about another issue in terms of energy policy. In South Carolina, regulators recently approved an application by South Carolina Electric and Gas to build 2 new nuclear plants. The whole issue of nuclear power and how the South is dealing with it compared to other parts of the country.
Yeah, well, clearly there's a whole movement to have a nuclear revival, and its home is right here in the South. As you know, nuclear power pretty much stalled out after 1979. We just had the 30th anniversary of 3 Mile Island, and we just did a big investigation into some of the lessons of 3 Mile Island. Some of the evidence, we found 2 whistleblowers in Asheville, North Carolina, who were there on the scene right after TMI meltdown happened. And they shared their story for the first time about how they believe the government's story about what happened there was incorrect. But what's most important about that is that seemingly the government hasn't learned its lessons from 3 Mile Island about whether or not nuclear power can be safe. And that has a lot of people in the South worried. Where the plants that are being proposed for the nuclear revival are in South Carolina, they're in Georgia, they're in Florida. And there's also talk even long down the road, places like North Carolina and other parts of the Deep South. So this really is the home of the nuclear revival. But what are the issues here? One is they still haven't found a good way to store the nuclear waste, and that really raises a big issue for people. A lot of the questions about what happens if there is a disaster at these plants. And we just wrote today about a new study that came out here in North Carolina about the extraordinary cost. One thing people don't really know a lot about the stimulus was the billions of dollars in loan guarantees that have been put aside for the nuclear power industry that are part of that stimulus. This is taxpayer money. It's being used to fund which a lot of people in a lot of communities believe is a untested and a somewhat dangerous form of energy to be turning to.
Finally, the census here in the South, Chris, the significance of the 2010 census.
Yeah, well, this is going to be really big because the South is the fastest growing region in the country right now. It was really interesting after 2008 elections, a lot of people said the South is declining into political influence. I think they're not going to be saying the same thing after the 2010 census when it becomes clear the southern states are rapidly growing. They're set in the 2010 census to gain up to 7 to 9 congressional seats and electoral college votes. But the key issue here also is that the South also has a disproportionate share of people who tend to get undercounted in the census. African Americans, low-income communities, new immigrant communities with the fastest growing population in the South, military families. And this means that millions of dollars could be lost in southern states if there's an undercount. But even if there is an undercount, the South is expected to dramatically grow. And what that's going to open up is massive battles around redistricting, who gets represented, the future of the Voting Rights Act, guaranteed to protect the voting rights of African Americans and others. And there's been huge Supreme Court decisions about that recently. But all these battles are going to get reopened. You probably remember the Texas legislators heading to the hills after the first round of redistricting in 2000. I think you're going to see that all over again because it's going to be a huge battle about who gets represented in the politics of the South.
And Chris, I know Amy said finally, but one final question. The Employee Free Choice Act, the role of some Southern Democrats in getting this important legislation through the #1 priority for organized labor in America?
Yeah, I think the Blanche Lincoln, the senator from Arkansas, her defection this week is a huge blow to the future of that act. What's especially interesting, though, it's in the South. And, of course, she comes from the state of Arkansas. She received over $50,000 in campaign contributions over the last 5 years from Tyson Foods and Walmart, two of the companies that have the most OSHA violations and citations in the country. So it really wasn't a surprise in a way that that was going to happen, but it does deal a severe blow. It takes the Democrats off of the 60 majority that they needed to get that through without facing a block. And I think that's especially important here in the South because this is where you see the most egregious cases of employee intimidation, of workers being harassed. And we just had a historic union victory here in North Carolina at Smithfield Foods, where there were extraordinary tales of people of the company hiring private security guards to follow workers home if they spoke out for the union, workers getting beaten by the private security guards. This is an issue that hits close to home for Southern workers. So I think it's especially disconcerting to them to see that there's a faction of people in the Senate who are willing to turn their back on that cause and put the ability of workers to organize unions at risk.
Chris Crum, I want to thank you for being with us on this whirlwind tour around the country. One, the lesson is never say finally. Chris Crum is with the Institute for Southern Studies. He blogs there as well. We'll link to his website as we broadcast here in Raleigh, North Carolina. When we come back from break, well, we're talking sustainability. Stay with us.
I don't wanna write this down.